Hello, hello. Good evening. Right. Hopefully this is all working now. I was having some problems with my internet earlier today, cutting out. Hopefully it's all okay. If someone can just let me know that the audio and the video are all working okay, that would be great. And who have we got here? W. Bullman's. Another week passed already. Indeed it is. Indeed, it's gone quickly. XRP Yoga. Give it Yoda, rather. XRP Yoga? That's a whole different person. XRP Yoda, give it the hammer toe. For those that, interesting one, for those that don't know, well, as you can probably tell looking at the screen, my surname is Hamilton, and the whole reason behind hammer toe is actually nothing to do with my my feet at all. It was a phonetic corruption of my surname, Hamilton, and my username used to be M Hamilton on a Unix system many years ago, a Sonos Unix system. Sorry, a BSDR Unix system, and when they moved to Sonos it got truncated to 8 characters and it became M Hamilton, and that phonetically evolved over the space of a little while to Mr. Hammertoe and then just Hammertoe. So if anybody's ever wondering, that's why it is. And strangely enough, it's always available on any social media, so yeah, go figure. So I've just stuck with it, but yeah, it's been that way since about 1994, 1995, when I lived in the US and worked for a small internet provider there. So anyway, yes, good to see everybody. Who else we got here? Owen, Stuart, XRP, Salva Leone. Cool, some names I recognise. Myogi, yes, cool, some more regulars on here. Great. I'll just give it another minute or two for anybody else to turn up, and then we'll get started. Great. I hope everybody else has been having a good week as well. And yeah, Loco is free. Hey, hi, Loco is free. Seems to be a fair bit going on in the world, XRP wise and cryptocurrency wise in general. In the last week, lots of stuff's been happening, which is great. There's so many YouTubers out there now, so many people. I'm kind of late to the YouTube game, having only started, relatively recently. But yeah, there's so many channels out there with a lot of news on there, a lot of fantastic stuff. About what's going on in the industry. It's amazing. Every week you think there can't be anything more to report, and people like Crypto Eri, pretty much every day, twice a day sometimes, there's new stories coming out. So that's great. Hi, Research Omega. Cool. Okay. Well, right. I guess then I'll get started. Yes, Owen, thank you. Remember to subscribe. That's great. Being a YouTuber, I've now got to beg people for subscriptions and likes, and apparently I have to say mash that like button. No, smash that like button. Yeah, I'm sounding like an old fuddy-duddy when I say that, but anyway, yeah, all the cool kids. Anyway, Matt, you need some merch. Yeah, make up some stickers or something, and yeah. Do you have to have a big green plant in the background to be a YouTuber? Well, I've got this plant here in the background, Viking. That plant is now since 1999. So that plant is now, yeah, 10 years old. No, wait a minute. No, not 90. Yeah, 20 years old. That plant is actually 20 years old. And amazingly, it belonged to the previous owner of a company I then took over and ran for a while, and it was always kind of superstitious that if the plant ever died, the company would die, and amazingly the plant has actually even outlasted the company. But yeah, it's been through a lot, and amazingly it's I've managed to keep it alive. It might not look anything special, but it like I said, it's 20 years old, that plant, so I'm quite amazed. It's been moved around all over the place and had various haircuts, shall we say, and is still living. So anyway, this evening, sorry, just wet my throat there. Ledgers, exchanges, trading, and xRapid. So, what kind of prompted this kind of title for this talk was anybody following in the XRP world, which is most of you, I'm guessing, will have seen various people talking about this concept of, is there two ledgers on the network? Are there two XRP ledgers? Is there a public ledger and a private ledger? And so really what I want to talk about is the kind of technical bits behind that, because I think what's happening with a lot of that conversation is the actual reality is getting lost, and as a result of that, there are certain people saying a lot of things that I would say is hype, is getting people to believe things that are just not true, and yeah, and so I want to dispel that. But rather than just dispel it by sort of saying yes that's true or yes that's not true, what I want to do is actually kind of talk about some of the technical background that might enable people, hopefully, not only to understand this whole thing a bit better, but to understand more, to be able to understand further things as well, and when topics like this come up, to hopefully have a bit more knowledge that will help them make informed decisions. So yeah. So the big question, there was something, I can't even remember how it started or who started it, but there was this thing about, is there are there two ledgers? And this ended up on XRP chat, it ended up on Twitter. I think where it kind of came from is there's a sort of a bit of an underlying frustration in some people that the price of XRP has not been moving, and there's a lot of good announcements coming out and the price has just not been moving. And that has led some people to speculate that maybe there is another XRP, a hidden, private XRP network that banks and FIs are using at the moment, and all the value is in there. And there's this kind of almost like sentiment, perhaps, that maybe they are being ripped off by Ripple. The individuals are being ripped off by Ripple because there's value going on this private network rather than on the public network. Right, so that's that seems to be what some people are suggesting, and I've seen it on Reddit, I've seen it in Twitter DMs with people, and it keeps coming up saying, is there a private ledger? Is there not a private ledger? And it's actually not just a straightforward answer. So and this is actually being used, unfortunately, as a negative. So XRP Trump. Doc, as a lot of people know, Dr. Trump, Dr. XRP Trump on Twitter, kind of said no, there's definitely no private ledger, which is correct in certain senses. It's correct in the basis of, if you are talking about where XRP lives, there is only one ledger. Okay, so this is what gets to the root of this. Let's get to this straight away, and then we can talk about the wider aspects of it. XRP is a digital asset, it's a cryptocurrency. XRP lives on the XRP ledger. That's the only place it can be. Now, the XRP ledger is the network of sort of 1,000 plus servers that make up the ledger. So this is the thing. If we look at the on XRP charts, and we can see here the network. So this is the XRP ledger. When it loads, it may take a little while. Here we go. There we go. So these are all the nodes in the XRP ledger. All these public nodes, and like I said, I think there's 1,040 currently nodes on the network. All communicating, running a few different versions of the software here, but they're all running and communicating the transactions that are going on in the network. So each time somebody makes a transaction on the network and makes a payment, so there's a great what is it? Living Ledger. Is it? It's a great site. A Living Ledger. This is a visual representation. If you've not seen this, this is beautiful. It's a visual representation of the XRP ledger. So the previous thing we're looking at is the nodes on the network. These are the actual transactions going between the nodes, and so you can see them kind of going on. Here we go. So 78, 90, 80, 90 transactions have been processed since we've been here. You know, I've been watching 20 odd seconds, about 5 transactions a second, and you can rotate this around. It's pretty cool. Showing what's going on. I think you can even click on them and find out. Yeah, so you can find out about different ones on here as well. But yeah, that's the transactions kind of going on. So we're doing, you know, sort of 5 odd transactions a second or whatever it is going on here. Now, there's only one ledger, only one XRP ledger. That is, you know, that there's no dispute about that. There is only one XRP ledger, and the reason for that being is there's only one place XRP can be, and that is on the XRP ledger. So if there's some other network, which I'm going to get to in a minute, if there's other networks around or other ledgers, yes, but there's only one XRP ledger. There's only one place where XRP is. And XRP cannot be removed from that ledger. So there's about 100 billion, a little under 100 billion, because a little tiny bit is burnt with each transaction. There's about 100 billion XRP on the ledger, and it can never be removed or put on there. There's always going to be around about 100 billion. Like I said, that'll slowly go down with the coin burn per transaction. But all you can do on that ledger is move the XRP from one account to another account. Right? That's all. There will always be the same total amount on that ledger. All you're doing is redistributing it between who actually holds that XRP. Right? So, what is this thing about the this private ledger? And you know, there's been videos of, you know, put forward of, for instance, like Brad Garlinghouse recently at an event in Thailand, I believe it was, in a video in which he was talking about when they first went live with the product they had, the 1.0 product of xCurrent, and some Middle Eastern banker was getting upset that they could see the transactions, and so they created something separate. Right? That's what he describes. Now, some people have said, oh, so that's a private ledger. Well, yes, it is. It's in some ways. It's a thing called xCurrent. It's based upon a technology called ILP that Ripple created. ILP stands for Inter-Ledger Protocol. It's a protocol to connect between ledgers. So what happens with ILP and with xCurrent is that a bank in one country, they have a ledger. You know, within a bank, when you deposit your money in a bank, if you imagine in a simplified sense, everybody's money that gets deposited, if you'll physically go in and hand them money, say, to make this simpler, all that money gets put in a big pot in a safe in a bank. And then there is a ledger that says, okay, £100 of that, or $100 or 100 euros or whatever, is owned by Matt. You know, $150 is owned by Viking, $80 is owned by Loco, you know, $20 is owned by Darren, you know, $1,000 owned by Miyogi, right? So there's a ledger there that says how much of that money in the vault is owned by each person. That's what a ledger is, an accounting ledger, right? So a bank will have one of those ledgers, and there'll be another bank, say, on the other side of the planet that also has a ledger. Now, what ILP allows you to do is to connect those two ledgers. So it is not a ledger in itself, it just allows the interconnection of two ledgers. So that's what's going to allow then one ledger to be able to make a payment, one bank to be able to make a payment to the other, in which they say, okay, we take this amount of money off this account and we add it to this account on the other bank, right? And that's what happens. So that is ILP. That is what xCurrent uses. So it's not a ledger in itself. It is a mechanism to connect multiple ledgers. And ILP can be used for other things as well. So it's not just between bank ledgers. It could be between, say, the XRP ledger and the Bitcoin blockchain, for example, or Ethereum or Hyperledger or whatever it might be. So that's what it's going to be using, right? That is what xCurrent is. Ripple have another product, xRapid, and the whole point of xRapid is to source public liquidity. It's to source liquidity that the banks do not hold. So one of the reasons for developing xRapid was that the banks were nervous about holding XRP itself on their balances because of the regulatory risk of doing so. So xRapid was developed, and xRapid allows the bank to effectively buy the XRP on demand when a transaction is needed to be processed, send the XRP to the other end, then it is sold instantly and the fiat is transferred. So they would send, say, whatever, 100 US dollars to one exchange, it's sold to XRP, the XRP is then transmitted on the XRP ledger to the other exchange, and then on the other exchange they would then use that XRP to buy, say, euros, and then those euros are sent to the destination. So that's what xRapid uses. xRapid uses the XRP ledger, right? Now again, are there multiple ledgers, people are saying? Well, yes, there are hundreds of ledgers, because as I mentioned with the banks, every single exchange, for example, has a ledger. So if you send your XRP to Bitstamp, for example, or Binance or GateHub, or, well, not so much GateHub, they're slightly different because they work on the ledger. But if you send it to Binance or Bitstamp or Kraken or whoever it might be, when you send your XRP there, it's all kept in one wallet, an exchange wallet. And then they have an internal ledger that says this user owns this much, this user owns this much. So if you do a trade on Binance between, say, Bitcoin and XRP on Binance, then what will happen is that will update that internal ledger. Nothing will change on either the XRP ledger, the main public XRP ledger, or the Bitcoin blockchain. So nothing will change there at that point. The only thing that changes is the internal ledger of the exchange. So in some regards, you could say, well, is there a private ledger? Are there transactions that we're not seeing? Well, yes, that's what exchanges do. They do this all the time internally, and each exchange will have a ledger. If, for example, I have an account with Uphold, and I send some XRP to somebody else on Uphold, then that doesn't happen on the main public XRP ledger. That just happens within Uphold. So what about pricing of this? So again, I think a lot of this has come about because some people think that, like I said, there's some additional private XRP ledger in which there's a much higher price. That's why they're feeling ripped off, because they think, well, hey, our XRP is only worth 30, 33, whatever it is, cents. And maybe there's another ledger in which it's worth a whole lot more. So when they see that could be what they are thinking, that they think that there's this private ledger in which there's some other XRP that's somehow worth a lot more that is hidden away somewhere else. Well, that's simply not the case. That can't be the case. The reason being is that I could send somebody some XRP and I could charge them whatever I want for that, right? Say, for instance, I send some XRP to somebody else. So, Stuart XRP, I send you 100 XRP. Now, at the current rate, 100 XRP should be worth, what, $33? So, if I send you that 100 XRP and you give me $33, that's a sort of a market rate exchange. But we could do whatever price we agreed. I could give you 100 XRP and you could give me $10. And we could agree that for whatever reason, that is a perfectly valid amount to pay. And again, that wouldn't be reflected on the XRP ledger because it is just a payment. All that happens on the ledger is it would see that this 100 XRP that used to be in this one account is now in this other account. All we've done is move it from one to another, right? It knows nothing about how much was paid for it. It's not a trade. It is just literally a payment between two people. Now, but why would I do that? Who knows? But Stuart's now got 100 XRP that he's only paid $10 for, and it's worth 33. So there would be a temptation there for him to go and sell that on the public exchanges for $33, and he's now made a $23 profit. Now, Stuart might do that, Stuart might not do that, he might hold on to it, but if this is a sort of more generalized thing, if this is a regular thing that I am selling it significantly lower, then that means somebody has the ability to make a profit on it. They can sell it for a lot less. And if they start selling it for a lot less on a public exchange, the result will be that it will start to bring the price down. Right? Now, if it's only 100 XRP, it's probably not going to make a big difference, right? Not many people are going to notice that. But if you were able to sell it at this lower price continuously, there would be a pressure to bring the price down. But of course, from my point of view, if I'm selling it continually under the price, there's a pressure for me to raise the price. I mean, why would I be doing that and be continuously making a potential loss? Because I could sell it on the public ledger for $33 rather than $10. So I'm losing out there. So there's a pressure for me to raise the price. So what this does is bring about an equilibrium between the prices, right? So this is what happens with regards to what's known as arbitrage. So arbitrage is buying an asset in one location and selling it in another and hopefully making a profit. So, for example, at the moment, you could buy XRP at Bitstamp, and it is slightly cheaper than XRP in an exchange called XMO. So you could buy it in one, sell it in the other. And the price difference between those two is, a few percent, right? So it might not be that much, but if you could do it continually, there could be a profit there to be made. In the case of XMO, there's probably a reason why it's slightly higher, and that's probably to do with the friction of being able to withdraw from their exchange. So it might be that you could get it there, but it's now stuck in another country and you have to be a resident of that country, or they might charge a certain amount to withdraw the fees. So some exchanges, for example, for US dollar withdrawals, in international SWIFT withdrawals can charge quite a high sum of money. So I know that I think CEX in the UK is about $50 to do a withdrawal. So that will be why the price will be slightly higher, because you can't withdraw it as easily because there is a large cost. But if you look at the exchanges which have a sort of a similar kind of level, so if you look at, say, Bitstamp, Kraken, even if you're not talking XRP, talk about Bitcoin, say Coinbase or whatever, you'll find that the prices will be about even. And the reason being is there will be people doing arbitrage, and that will be moving the amounts between each other. I've just realised why this might be lagging. Somebody pointed out it's probably because I've got these living ledger things running in the background. So let me just stop those. They might be using up a lot of CPU. So hopefully that might have stopped the lagging if that's what was causing it. But as I said, yeah, so there's people doing arbitrage, and whilst there might be a profit be made by arbitrage, the act of doing arbitrage brings the prices closer together. So in actually doing it, you effectively remove the arbitrage opportunity by doing it. So it brings the prices closer together. So as long as there is a public ledger, which in this case is the XRP ledger, then all prices are going to tend towards that, unless there are any external factors that are preventing it. So, like I said, the cost of withdrawal or some contractual agreements or whatever it might be. But that's going to be the price, because it's a public price that people are willing to pay. So even if there's a mechanism by which two banks can exchange XRP, if they're not exchanging it on the actual XRP ledger, then all they're actually transferring is an obligation. They're transferring an IOU. So if they did it with just, say, ILP, if two banks transferred XRP between each other using ILP, then actually all they're doing is effectively transferring the obligation. Unless it moves on the XRP ledger as well, then that transaction has not actually been settled, right? So unless it moves on the XRP ledger, the transaction has not been settled. And the XRP ledger is where all the XRP lives. So we can't suddenly have some miraculous other amount of XRP somewhere else that would have a different price. Because any XRP anywhere else would need to be, unless there's some fraudulent activity going on, it would need to be backed by XRP on the actual ledger. Now, yes, I mentioned about fraudulent activity. That could be something that could happen. You could have an exchange, and it could be that you're buying XRP on that exchange and you're not actually getting the real XRP. But if you were to actually withdraw that, then you would actually get the XRP. But there's some exchanges at which people have been questioning whether or not they do hold the actual XRP to back what they've been doing. So, for example, eToro, there's been a lot of discussion about whether they actually have the XRP there. So hopefully that gives people a bit of a better idea about this. So yes, there could be private ledgers. There's hundreds of them already. Each exchange has its own ledger. Each sort of wallet software can have its own ledger. But this is nothing nefarious, right? As long as there is some kind of ability to buy and sell back to the main ledger, then that's what the price will tend towards. Even if they're not able to for a while. So even if I see Sam's talking about whether there's some contractually restricted part of it. So yes, it could be contractually restricted. That XRP would still live on the XRP ledger. So it's still there. It's not disappeared. It's not some new XRP. It's not some additional XRP or some hidden XRP that you can't see. It's still there. That does not change, right? So there may be some covenant that says, okay, we're going to sell it to you for slightly less, but you can't sell it. And there's been some talk about this is what Ripple may have done in the past with some partners. They've said, okay, we'll give you a bunch of XRP for some particularly good rate. You're not allowed to sell it. Well, that's fine. When that covenant expires, it would be worth what somebody is willing to pay for it, which would be what it is willing to be paid for on the public markets. That's what the eventual price will be. So there may be some perceived difference at the time, but eventually it will be what the public ledger price is. Okay? So, yeah, hopefully that kind of dispels it a bit. Sam, you say, agree 100%. I've never said there's hidden ledger trading XRP officially off the XRPL. No, but I saw in your last video, I would suggest there was a bit of scaremongering there and misrepresenting what had been said by Brad Garlinghouse and David Schwartz in what they were describing, and a lot of people I think had misunderstood between what you had said there and what some other people have been saying on Twitter, and the message was certainly very confused, and I think a lot of people were thinking there was something there that was not there. So yeah, hopefully that explains it. What else? There were some other things I wanted to cover on here as well. Oh yeah, actually, an interesting point to note with regards to this and multiple ledgers is actually if you go right the way back to the original Ripple Pay system designed by Ryan Fugger before David Schwartz, Brito and McCaleb got involved, the original Ripple Pay system had multiple ledgers. Each user had their own ledger, and you would then be able to transfer obligations from effectively one ledger to another ledger at some agreed rate. So you would have different assets that could potentially be worth different amounts. So I could have US dollars that might be valued slightly different to your US dollars because mine are in cash and yours are in a check or in the form of whatever, an iTunes gift card or something, right? So that original Ripple Pay system by Ryan Fugger actually had separate ledgers. They were all separate. And the one thing that happened when McCaleb came up with the idea, Jed McCaleb came up with the idea for XRP as a currency itself, was they wanted one central ledger, well, a central ledger, a decentralized ledger system, but one ledger that everybody was represented on over a decentralized system, and a single token that could be used interchangeably between all the different users. So in the current XRP ledger, they actually still have some remnants of that. So you can issue your own assets. So I could issue US dollars on the XRP ledger, and I could trade those for with somebody else. And there could be an exchange rate in which it says my US dollars are worth 90% of what your US dollars are worth, or vice versa. And that's all still there in the XRP ledger and part of the decentralized exchange that's built into the ledger. So that kind of remnants are still there. They're not used as much. They were originally part of the plan for what Ripple had for the XRP ledger. And originally each bank was going to issue its own assets on the XRP ledger, and they'd use a decentralized exchange inside. The problem with that being is that those assets, those IOUs that they issued, had a counterparty risk. So if Bank A issued some US dollars on the XRP ledger and then suddenly went out of business, anybody holding those issued US dollars from Bank A, they would then suddenly be stuck because they'd be worthless. There'd be nobody then to redeem those US dollars that they'd issued, and also it meant that everything was public on the XRP ledger, and so they solved two problems with this xRapid system. One was that the banks never held an IOU. They would exchange their fiat currency for XRP, and XRP has no counterparty. Somebody described it, I think earlier on today, as in you're holding XRP, you're holding a lump of gold. You can spend that. There's nobody that's kind of stops that having the value that it is perceived to be. So yeah, that's you could transfer that, and with the xRapid sort of idea, you solve two problems. One, you solve the issue of not holding IOUs. You had XRP, which has no counterparty, but two, the actual individual transactions themselves didn't necessarily have to be public. All you would see if you were observing the ledger would be XRP transferring from one exchange to another. Now, some people have tried to find, for instance, the Mercury FX transaction that happened. They were public about a, whatever it was, £3,500, £4,000 transaction to Mexico, and people have had a dig around on the ledger, and some people think they have found it based upon various heuristics. That was probably easier to find because they knew the value they were talking about, and they knew the destination and the source, and they knew the time that it was going to happen. But I think in general it would be much harder because all you'll see is transactions going on between two exchanges. Now obviously you can possibly analyze them and do some deduction from that, but it's not just a straightforward being able to see one bank sending stuff to the other bank. Which is pretty much, yes, Sam, so yes, exactly what you're just asking here about, do you think xRapid transactions should be sent individually over XRPL? That, as my understanding, is that's what xRapid will be doing, sending them individually, and the point being is you no longer have to batch them up, which is what the current situation is. You have to batch transactions up because the actual fees of doing that settlement and the process of doing that settlement is much more manual. I suppose there's no reason why you couldn't batch them up with xRapid. If it's just as quick to do individual ones, you could batch them up as well. If you have enough float at the time, you would probably need some XRP as a float in the meantime on each end, or some currency on each end. And again, the idea behind xRapid is you don't have to hold as much currency. Well, you don't have to hold any currency at the local end, but maybe with xRapid you could go a halfway house. You could hold a smaller amount of currency, so it would still be cheaper to operate between the two, or you could have some hybrid approach that some currencies you hold more of, some currencies you don't. So the more exotic currencies maybe you don't sit there holding, or riskier currencies, if there's a higher risk of exchange rate fluctuation, then maybe you don't hold them as much. So right, what are the questions here? Just looking through. Roberto saying not every xRapid transaction is recorded on chain, does not scale and leaks privacy. Well, every xRapid transaction overall is going to need to be recorded on the chain, whether or not they are individually. So again, it might be that they batch up multiple ones. You could use payment channels on the XRP ledger if you had a payment channel open between the two exchanges. But the chances are the actual amount of traffic going on between the exchanges in the end will probably mean that it will effectively end up, there'll be so much noise. I doubt you'd be able to find it that easily. That's not to say you couldn't do, but yes, you could batch up a few of them together if you wanted to try and obfuscate the actual amounts, say. So what else here? Sam said, that's what we've been told. What do you think the 1 billion XRP sitting on multiple exchanges is about? Oh, so like 1 billion sat in Bitstamp, for example, or Binance. Yeah, there's a lot of exchanges that have a lot of XRP sat there. What it's for? Good question. Now, obviously, those exchanges hold the XRP to to back the XRP that their users are holding. So, if you've got, for argument's sake, 1 million users that all hold 1 XRP, then you're going to need to have 1 million XRP sat in an account to back that. Now, as we've seen transactions going from Ripple's XRP2 account to some of these exchanges, kind of topping them up, so it seems. Now, whether or not that just means they needed more liquidity at the time, whether they didn't have all the backing originally and they're catching up, it would be very hard to say unless you actually knew how many users they had and how much they actually held there. It could be that Ripple are sending them some to use potentially with xRapid as a float, potentially. W Boomans does not scale. XRPL is not even breaking a sweat. Yeah, so the XRPL, what are we doing earlier? To say 5 requests a second. I've seen it get up to sort of 20, 30, I think 50. We did some digging around on the XRP ledger for the highest number of transactions per in any single one closed ledger, and I can't remember what the value was now, but it was I think a few hundred, and the nominal sort of capacity that's been mentioned is 1,500. I don't know how sort of strict that limit is, or whether that's basically a sort of a notional limit based upon what they've tried so far. But that's still quite a lot. But you can have obviously payment channels which allow even faster transactions. So payment channels, you delay the actual settlements. You can send multiple smaller payments. So that's what Coil uses for live streaming of payments. You have multiple small payments and then it is settled kind of when you close the transaction. Similar to how Bitcoin's Lightning Network works, but actually in production now. So what else here do we say? Viking, as a summary, do you think banks who trust each other will just swap XRP in private wallets? Then xRapid individual payments will be for banks, anyone to trust with exotic currencies they don't trust. Do you think banks who trust each other will swap XRP in private wallets? Potentially. That would imply they're holding the XRP themselves, which I guess depends upon their sort of regulatory environment they're in, what country they are in, and what happens over the next year or two with regards to laws around cryptocurrencies and banking and that side of things. So yeah, but they could just settle it and they could just send it backwards and forwards on wallets there. So Sam says we have 4 exchanges all holding 1 billion XRP. Seems like they're setting up for something. Ripple has wallets backing those up. Some holding additional 1 billion. Potentially, that'd be great to know. So yeah, it would be speculation. So I'm not sure, but 1 billion XRP doesn't, might not be that much compared to the number of users they have. I could see potentially they have enough users that could fill that, especially if they've got early users with large amounts of XRP potentially. So Roberto, 1,500 transaction theoretical is nowhere enough to have all remittance transactions. They have to be buffered. Yeah, so again, you could buffer them manually, putting them together, or you could use something like payment channels and do it that way through that. So yeah, Roberto, sending single dollars over the ledger is nonsense. Potentially, we'll see. Like I said, it might be that there's some halfway house with this, and that you don't have to necessarily hold as much liquidity at each end as you do now, and you can kind of augment it with XRP, and maybe that's kind of a hybrid approach that will evolve and potentially solve some of the kind of the chicken and egg scenario as well. So Sam says, any thoughts on the XRPL monitor transactions of 550 million regularly sending out XRP from Ripple, getting broken down over 3 layers of wallets ending up in exchange accounts, repeating regularly? There's a number of, well, I'm not sure if it's regarding that, but I know that Jed McCaleb does regular sales. I mean, he was for a while. I think he stopped about a week or two ago. 9 a.m. UTC every morning there was a big sale on Bitstamp. Whether or not it's related something to do that, I'm not sure. Entirely what's going on there. But yeah, obviously Ripple are selling amount of XRP that's going into the market. Whether it's winding up in with end users or not, I don't know. They could have exchanges running market makers that are slowly dribbling out XRP. So Ripple have said themselves that they have algorithmic trading that kind of slowly sells off bit by bit some of their XRP at market rate. So it could be related to that. So Darren Moore, can you speak more about IOUs? Do you ever see IOUs paired to XRP? Do you mean the IOUs within the XRP ledger, so using things like US dollars and Bitcoin on the XRP ledger, or do you mean IOUs of XRP kind of outside the ledger on exchanges? Let me know which one, and I'll try and see if I can work out, see what you're saying there. XRP to the Moon asks, doesn't Ripple's underlying tech consolidate payments between parties? Bank A send $1,000 in a day, Bank B sends $1,500. Just use the difference. I don't think it does. No, I don't think xRapid does, because as far as I'm aware, it doesn't. It could do some netting transactions, but kind of, from my understanding, the point of this being is that you now no longer need to do the netting. So you don't need to have the float sat there about that. Sayata Blayat, if I've got that right. Are there any rules about questions we can ask? Well, go ahead. If I can answer it, I'll answer it. If I can't, I can't. If I don't know, I'll say I don't know. So yeah, but I don't think there's any particular rules unless you go completely off the wall. Try and stray around the topic of ledgers, exchanges, and etc. etc. So XRP Yoda says, so banks can send XRP between the ledger's wallets they have without using the public ledger. No, if it goes from one wallet to another wallet, one account to another account, then that has to happen on the public ledger. There's no other way for that to happen and be settled other than going on the public ledger. So they could use, say, a payment channel, and you wouldn't see it until the payment channel is closed, and then you would see it on the XRP ledger. But it would, if you sent it between two accounts, wallet accounts on the XRP ledger, then it would show up there. There's no other way around it. There's no way to move XRP from one XRP wallet to another XRP wallet on the ledger without it showing up on the ledger. And if the XRP is not on the ledger, it's not real XRP. It's some kind of IOU towards XRP. Right, that you've been given. So you've deposited your XRP with Uphold, and Uphold effectively in return give you an IOU for that XRP, and you then have can redeem that effectively when you withdraw your XRP. But they basically say we're going to be the custodian. We will hold whatever this 1,000 XRP you've given up. We will hold it in our accounts, and we will give you an IOU for it. It's a bit like the ticket they give you at the cloakroom. You give them your coat, they give you a ticket. When you come back, you give them the ticket, you get your coat back. And so yeah, it's kind of a bit like that. You give them your XRP, you get given an IOU. You give back the IOU, you get given the XRP back again. So Stuart asks, have you seen any data representing xRapid being used yet, and how can an everyday person like myself look into this? So somebody was doing something on this. Rats. What was the name? Somebody might remember. They had a very stylized sort of black and white curly kind of scripty logo that was on Twitter, and they were kind of studying it, and they thought they found the recent Mercury FX transaction by Coalex. And they were kind of looking at the timing of transactions. But that's basically what you've got to go on, the timing and the amounts. And if you know that they're between this exchange and that exchange, and you've worked out which wallets are on there, then it's basically kind of deducing it. But you can't just look at the XRP ledger and go, that is that's an xRapid transaction. You won't see it on there, as far as I'm aware, unless they put some metadata in the payment. You can put some in there. Silkjar, I don't know if it was Silkjar. He's definitely done a Silkjar. Sorry, just 1 second. Throat go dry. Silkjar has definitely done a lot of graphing, some fantastic stuff. Let me just see. He might have a link to it. I've shut my browser down. There we go. Twitter.com. Silk Jaer. Is that it? Yeah, Silkjar's done lots of visualization work, but there was somebody else I'm thinking of. Maybe he's retweeted them. No, Galgatron. Maybe he's it wasn't Galgatron, but maybe he's retweeted them. Hasn't tweeted. Wait, what? Galgatron. Interesting. This looks like it's a spam account. I can't spell. Galgatron. Here we go. Right, so he's done some study here, saying he hasn't been able to see anything sort of in the sort of overall data, but there was somebody else that had studied the timings of the data and thought they'd spotted something. Like I said, I can remember the look of the logo. It's kind of got a sort of a stylized script kind of thing, but anyway. Let's see here. Tom, late for the party. Well, I've said most of the interesting bit, Tom, but you can catch up on the video. Don't worry. Would the volume moving on the XRPL and the transaction per second rate not be a good indicator of xRapid usage? It will be eventually, I would imagine. I think at the moment the XRP transactions, I will say, I think they are fairly limited. I think there's not a huge amount of them going on. I think they will be growing, but I don't think they are large enough to be seen above the background of all the other transactions going on in the XRP ledger. Pardon me, the payments of general users moving stuff around. Stedas, maybe it was Stedas. No. Like I said, I recognise the logo. Anyway, whoever it was, they'd studied kind of the timings of it and identified a few potential spikes, and hence they thought they'd found the Koalex one. So, XRP Yoda, chat is very slow on your side, Matt. By the time you read this, I would have made a sandwich and eaten it. Yes, there is a delay that Ripple does, that YouTube does. I could probably see this quicker on maybe another chat window. I'm not sure. But yeah, there is a delay there. Sorry, that's YouTube that does that. I think there's a few settings I could probably tweak that might improve that. But yes. So Saita Blyat, sorry, I'm butchering your name there. Why do you think banks will prefer using xRapid over Stellar Lumens? You don't need to answer if it's too unrelated. Well, Stellar Lumens in itself is just a cryptocurrency like XRP. So Stellar Lumens and XRP are similar. The Stellar ledger is similar to the XRP ledger. xRapid is an additional piece of software that uses the XRP ledger. In theory, xRapid could use the Stellar ledger. That would actually be a fairly trivial modification to get xRapid to use the Stellar ledger if that's what people wanted to do. Stellar is less represented. You've Stellar Lumens on less exchanges, and it's not as widely adopted. So that would make it a little bit harder for that. But in theory, it could do. But what the banks are buying into is not just the network, not the XRP ledger or the Stellar ledger, but the companies working with it. So, Ripple are working a lot, obviously, and they're building software specifically for banks to satisfy the needs of the banks, and they know banks. So Stellar is working a lot with IBM. IBM obviously have a lot of banking relationships, and it could be that IBM come up with something akin to xRapid, perhaps, or they might try a different approach. What was interesting was there was a quite a big noise on Stellar about a stable coin called Stronghold, I think it was, which is US dollar stable coin, and they were saying, well, banks are going to use this US dollar stable coin issued as effectively an IOU on the Stellar ledger. Well, that's the approach that Ripple took 3 years ago, and the banks turned around and said, we don't want that. We don't want to use stable coins because they have a counterparty risk. So we want to use something floating like XRP. So whichever strategy will win, we will find out in time. My money personally is on the XRP, but who knows. So Viking, have you seen anything that suggests the tech for payment channels is ready? Well, payment channels are there. They're working. If you use Coil now, there's a chance potentially that I am being paid right now as if there's any Coil subscribers watching this now, I could potentially be being paid right now by Coil using payment channels. So that's all there. That's working. And so asking again, what's your view on the current price of XRP and how will the price be moved up or down? I try to stay away from price stuff on here. I try to talk more about the technical side of things. Who knows? I'd love it to go up, of course. I think it will over time. Exactly the time, not sure. But we'll see. Tom Orr, SPQR, not sure what that means. Sam, 45 million, 24-hour XRPL volume. What background? Not sure what you're meaning there. Central banks probably don't want to use anything inflating currency they wouldn't use. Yeah. I think also as well, a lot of people think that the US dollar has, the US dollar does have a lot of influence, obviously, but a lot of stable coins are tied towards the US dollar, and there's a big wider world out there other than the US. David Theobald, banks do not want their transaction to show publicly how they use a ledger if it's public. If they do not use a ledger, how will they use XRP? So yeah, this is what I was trying to kind of get across, is that the banks will be transferring to an exchange. They'll be transferring it to XRP. Then the XRP will go from one exchange to another. So you won't see the transaction from bank to bank. You'll see it from exchange to exchange. So you won't necessarily know which bank it is that is doing that. You may be able to infer it from the transactions. You might be able to infer it from things like destination tags on the recipient end, but you won't be seeing necessarily the bank's transactions themselves. So they'll be going from exchange to exchange. We won't see them straight away. So Crypto Jim Jones. So really, we should be looking for a month-by-month volume increase for this point going forward. That'd be nice. Yeah. Volume increase month by month, that would be great. If this is taking off, then yes. I still think it's going to be a slower adoption than what we want. It has to have an exchange at each end at the moment. So what have we got? We've got 4. We've got Bitstamp, Bittrex, Bitso, and CoinsPH. CoinsPH recently got bought. That could be a really big thing potentially in the Philippines. So really, you're talking about between areas that are satisfied by the local currencies of those exchanges. But that still could be a lot of if Bitstamp covers the whole of Europe potentially. Europe to Mexico, Europe to the US. Europe to the US is probably fairly liquid anyway. They might not see much value in using xRapid. But potentially Europe to Philippines, yes, or Mexico to Philippines might be a less conventionally liquid route that they could use. But again, this is all building up slowly with network effects. Like I said, I'd love it to move faster. I've got a feeling it's going to take a while still. I think we're still talking a number of years while this ramps up. But with each new partner coming on, each new xRapid exchange, then that opens up a whole market. So SBI have talked about their SBI virtual currencies exchange in Japan being part of xRapid. Well, if you think when they bring that on, that now becomes available to Mexico, to Thailand, to the US and to Europe. just by coming onto one network, they've now got 4 markets there. So if you suddenly get an exchange in wherever, say Brazil, then you've opened up, a market there from Brazil to all of those other ones. So it's going to build up, I think, slowly, but it will pick up a kind of a critical mass, I think. So yeah. Research Omega says you're being paid through Coil right now. Great. Yeah, I haven't actually I haven't checked, but if there are Coil subscribers, then yeah, thanks very much. Coil is brilliant. Coil is really cool. What I want to do a video. I'm going to do it. I want to do a race. I want to go into a pub, go into a bar, and when they start pouring the pint of beer, I'm going to get somebody to send me a tip using the XRP tip bot. And then I'm going to send that XRP tip from the tip bot to WireX and then convert it to pounds and then pay for the beer before they finish pouring it. And that's the race I want to do, will be to actually, show that you can actually move XRP around quicker than you can pour a pint of beer. And what's brilliant with that, what I love about that whole thing, slight digression here, is that Coil, Vitsavind and the XRP Tipbot and WireX are 3 completely separate entities. They're 3 separate companies in 3 different countries with, no relationship to each other. Yet I can be on YouTube now receiving live streaming payment by Coil to my XRP Tipbot account that I can withdraw to my WireX card. Like I say, I can go and buy beer. And that's fantastic. And that's only because XRP is being used by all 3 of them. And neither of them would have, none of them individually would have come up with, seen that progressing like that as a use case. They all just set up their own thing, but it's kind of it's the beauty of network effects. You suddenly get something that is greater than the sum of the parts. So that's why. Slider asks why Hamato. When this is finished, rewind back to the start. I say why. Phonetic corruption of my surname Hamilton, in short. So let's see. Hey David, Sam probably wanted to reply. He's in a rude mood. I've said hi twice to him. Okay. If there's another blockchain that offers faster settlement times, do you think xRapid will make the switch from that blockchain away from XRP? Well, one of the things that David Schwartz has said with regards to, I think, ILP, the Interledger Protocol. The idea behind ILP is the pragmatism that there's not going to be one blockchain to rule them all, because people are going to want different features from the blockchain. Some want them to be private, some public, some fast, some slow, some, there'll be different criteria. And so just in the same way that we don't all have the same currency now, there will be different cryptocurrencies. And the idea behind ILP is to interconnect the different currencies. So Ripple stopped work on Codius, their smart contract platform, until they finished ILP, because then they could hook Codius up to ILP, which meant Codius is now currency agnostic. So you can use Codius and write smart contracts and pay with Ether or Bitcoin or XRP. But what David Schwartz has said is, we want XRP to be the most useful thing to use on ILP. But if it isn't, then we'd use something else. The idea being that he's pragmatic. He wants, obviously, I'm sure, XRP to be successful. But at the end of the day, it's trying to solve a problem. And if there's a better way to solve that problem, then great. So the example is EOS there with free transactions and half-second block times. Great. One of the problems, though, is that XRP's had 6 years of production use. EOS has been around in production less than a year. Has already had some teething troubles. They may have got over those now, but has it got the adoption that's needed? As I mentioned with xRapid, you need exchanges. Well, how many exchanges is EOS on? A fraction compared to XRP. So it needs not only just the technical aspect, but it also needs the adoption. It needs the people driving it, and that's why I think Ripple ultimately are going to succeed in what they're doing, because they've got the people going and talking to the banks, the regulators, the going to conferences, speaking at seminars, talking to people like the IMF, all this kind of stuff that nobody else is doing in the crypto sphere. So I think, you know, they are quite unique in that they're actually, you know, really seriously getting out there and pushing this. You know, so many, I work in tech, so many tech projects fail not because of technology, but because of implementation and because of human factors. And yeah, you know, I think there could be lots of very good cryptocurrencies out there that may be technically superior to XRP, but you know, unless they get the adoption, you know, they've got to not just be a little bit better, but they've got to be significantly better. I think you have to be something like 10 times better than the incumbent for somebody to change from what they're used to the incumbent. So great. Research Omega. Wirex is also cool. Yes, it is. Very good. Marv the Martian. Beer. Indeed. Beer. Could we do a beer estafette around the world? What's an estafette? I'll have to look that up. Banks are going to place their trust in XRP, and Cobalt will have a lot to do with that. Cobalt maybe. I think you know, Cobalt looks good. I don't think any development has actually happened on it. I think it's still very much you know, it's a theoretical paper. You know, it is written. It's an algorithm, but I don't think any implementation work has happened on that yet. And whilst it makes things go, I think it could speed up to sort of 1 second ledger close times, if I remember rightly, and has sort of better liveness properties in the event that you have, you know, indecision on the networks between the validators. It can't you know, stop as far as I'm aware. But you know, I think we're a long way off Cobalt being any kind of bottleneck to what's happening. I don't think Cobalt's holding anything up, to be honest with you, and I don't think the you know, the average user would even notice that Cobalt's in there, even if it suddenly turned up tomorrow. I don't think anybody would particularly notice it. So yeah. Marvin said, I heard Codius development has never been put on hold. It's coming. XRP plus Codius will be huge. Yeah, was it? You know, it's coming now. It was for a while. It was put on hold a year or so. 2 years ago, it was put on hold for a while. They restarted about a year ago. Roberto, XRP will be the shipping container of digital value. Yes, it could well be. If anybody doesn't know about this, go and look up the you know, the story of the shipping container, the standardized 40-foot shipping container that revolutionized shipping around the world, because you had a standardized container that you could load all your goods in, and then you could put this one container on a ship. You could take it off the ship and put it on a train. You could take it off the train and put it on a truck, and you didn't have to repack and unpack everything from the container. Beforehand, everything was, you know, carried sort of in bulk, and you know, you had to unload everything from your ship. So if you were shipping a whole bunch of whatever parts or whatever, you had to take them out of the ship individually, you know, scoop them up, whatever, put them somewhere else. Whereas the shipping container standardized it, and it's probably one of the, you know, I'll probably go out on a limb here and say it's probably one of the biggest revolutions, you know, in our lifetime, has probably been the shipping container. I hate to say it, working in tech, but yeah, a bit of metal. But it probably has done, you know, the largest thing for global commerce, apart than anything else. Viking, can one XRP keep adding decimal places to allow infinite micropayments? No. 6 decimal places. It's a million. It's a million drops per XRP. So it goes down a million. I think Bitcoin is 100 million Satoshi per Bitcoin, if I remember rightly. So whilst people say there's 21 million Bitcoin and 100 billion XRP, actually XRP is less divisible by 2 orders of magnitude than Bitcoin. So actually the difference is not as much as you think. You know, the difference is about, if I remember rightly off the top of my head, it's a difference of about 40 times more if you take the divisibility into account. But obviously one drop is a tiny amount, you know, fractions of a thousandth of a cent. XRP to the Moon asks, do you have the fiat and dispense? But those two operations, the two exchanges, they could happen simultaneously. or they could even happen in reverse, as long as you've got some buffer of XRP. But again, that implies you're holding XRP, which might then mean that that then becomes a regulatory issue rather than a technical issue. But there could be some things there. So Tom says a beer relay race. I Germany tip you and drink you. UK tip drink Australia. As long as we don't end up in an infinite loop, Tom. Otherwise, yeah, that's going to be a messy evening. Evening day. It may never end if we follow the sun around. Kip Kipper has asked, why are X not available in the US? I think they were demoing. I think they had a beta for it in the US. I think they're coming out with it. So either the US or Canada, somewhere in North America. So yeah, Viking, I've just built a 10-story block of 350 flats using shipping containers stacked 10 high. Awesome. Oh, that's great. I'd love to see a picture of that. I love stuff like that. They come pre-fitted out from China. Great. Space Cowboy, how small of a micropayment are they wanting to make it in the future? Well, you know, how small do you want to pay? I mean, Coil is sending stuff at, you know, fractions of an XRP at a time. So yeah, I mean, like I say, you go a millionth of an XRP, and if an XRP is 33 cents right now, then you go pretty small. So Research Omega says the banks want to terminate Nostro Vostro, and I don't see another currency be able to create the same liquidity just in time combined with the speed of XRP. Exactly, XRP is so far ahead. Now remember though, you know, people say, well, there's not that much liquidity in XRP. No, there's not. You know, and one of the stats, I haven't double checked this, but I'm pretty sure, you know, this sounds feasible. So people might know that Apple had a few bad months and their market cap kind of, you know, came down quite a bit. The amount of market cap Apple lost in the past 2 months is more than the market cap of the entire crypto industry, all the cryptocurrencies combined in total. Right? So, you know, we're such a tiny amount of the value of the world. You know, crypto is this tiny blip. You know, we think it's important. We spend all day talking about it, but it is minuscule. The good news is it can only grow from there. You know, I worked out the number of mobile phones in the world. You could just about, there was, I think it was 40 billion, no, 4 billion mobile phones. No, 25 billion, 2.5 billion, whatever it was. I worked out what it was, that you could basically, if every single mobile phone in the world had an XRP wallet, they could just about cover the wallet reserve of 20 XRP if it was still that. And that would be all the XRP, that would be the 100 billion used up. Now, of course, it's, you know, that's a long shot. There's no way every phone's going to be using XRP, but you know, it wouldn't be that difficult if, you know, there's two main operating systems, Android and iOS. You know, if one of them said, hey, we're going to use XRP for something, you know, hey, it could be you've suddenly hit a massive market there all of a sudden. So yeah. Miguel asked why are banks using Xcurrent and not Stellar. I think I kind of touched on this a little bit before. I think Ripple are just further ahead with banking. Basically, Stellar are working with IBM. IBM obviously have a big relationship with banks, but I think Ripple are just, you know, they're laser focused on this cross-border payment issue, and they've just been really focusing on pushing it. So yeah. Great. Jason Hillier, great stream. Thank you, Jason. A new name on here, so yeah, there's a lot of new names. It's been great this evening chatting to people. A lot of new names. I try to keep this to an hour. I've gone over quite a bit, but it's been great having everybody on here. So what I will do is I'll wrap this up now. If anybody has any more questions, then please feel free to ask them in the YouTube comments or grab me on Twitter. Details down there at Hamato, and yeah, I'll answer them in the comments or answer them on Twitter, and otherwise hopefully see you back here again next Monday. If anybody has any ideas for topics for next Monday, let me know. I'm trying to get back into the habit of doing them once a week, and so yeah, you know, talk about stuff. Otherwise I'll kind of go back and start covering some of the the previous basics again. One more quickly. Marvin, any thoughts on IMF and the possibility of adding XRP to the SDR basket? No idea. I think that's a massive political one about doing that. And I don't quite know how it would work having cryptocurrencies and fiat currencies mixed in the SDR. I suppose it could do. Some people have talked about things like XRP replacing the SDR. That's economics way beyond my level of understanding. So there we go. Great. Thanks a lot all, and I will see you hopefully next Monday. Okay. Good night.